Yeah, it looks like we're gonna have a good audience today. All right, so we're live, and now we'll start letting folks in. Got that. Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Piano Tech Radio Hour. Really good to have you all here. Yukimi, your co-host, so if you see anybody needs to be let in, you're welcome to let them in.
Okay.
And from the waiting room and stuff.
Okay.
We'll just take a minute to let folks trickle in, and then we'll get started with the session. And I am going to spotlight the main players here off the bat. So let me do that. Spotlight myself, spotlight Yukimi, and we'll add a spotlight when Clara jumps on as well.
I think she is.
There she is. She's in and out. We'll get her on a second. Okay, cool. All right, looking good for us to kind of get rolling and get started. And so I will start with that. As I mentioned last episode, I am streaming in live from Peru, which I don't know if you know, Yukimi.
Oh, I did not know.
Yeah, I'm traveling this week. I'm in a town called Pisac, and so that's why I'm here. Wherever you can find the best internet is where I am.
Okay.
Just a nice little restaurant we have right here.
Uh-huh.
So let me give an intro and we'll get rolling. Giving a welcome to everyone. And actually, let me change the settings here so we don't have a sound when people join. Okay. Welcome everyone to Piano Tech Radio Hour. We gather here every Saturday to meet with and learn from the most fascinating and knowledgeable folks in the piano world. I always like how that makes a little bit of pressure on the guests. You have to be fascinating and knowledgeable, or it just makes you feel good about being here. These people include manufacturers, rebuilders, musicians, makers of other instruments, and of course, we talk often to piano technicians and learn from them. Our mutual goal is to become better at our craft, help each other, and to create an ever more musical world together. Now, Piano Tech Radio Hour is brought to us by Piano Technicians Masterclasses. It's an online learning resource that brings you cutting-edge instruction from piano industry masters without leaving your home. You can find out more at pianotechniciansmasterclass.com. And that's an appropriate time. I'll share a link here soon. I'll share a link for you to sign up for our next class, which is happening live on October 1st this year. And we're going to be speaking with Joe Jackson, who has built a very interesting, expansive piano business in St. Louis, Missouri. You know, he like a lot of us started out as, just that piano tech running around doing tunings. And at this point, he's got an expansive business. I think he's got like maybe 10 to 12 employees. They do moving, they do rebuilding, all sorts of nuts and bolts. And I know like even with they're moving pianos like up to Canada and over to the West Coast. So they're doing all sorts of fun stuff. And we thought he'd give a good perspective on what it's like to just think about up-leveling, scaling up, pun intended, your piano business. And so we're going to have a session with him, and we're going to focus on a few key students, and so that we really answer those direct questions that folks have. We already have our first student who's going to be a piano Technicians Masterclasses regular. His name is Jorge Completo, and he is in Chile. And he's a very ambitious piano technician in Latin America. Appropriate connection to me being in Peru right now. So he'll join as one of our key students, and we'll answer his questions about expanding his business. And we do still have space potentially for a couple more direct mentorships. And so I will share the application form link here in the chat really quickly. Basically, if somebody wants personal mentoring from Joe about how to expand their piano tech business, they can go to this link and they will be able to apply to be one of the special students for that class. So that's just a little plug for what's going on right now. Let me see if I can pull up the link for his class as well. Just a second here. There it is. And I'll put that in the chat as well. So I think our first early bird pricing just ended. So unfortunately, you missed the cutoff on the early bird first pricing for Joe's class, but we still have one more two more early bird pricings where you can save basically $100. I think still at this point, or no, yeah, I think we're still at the level of $100. I'll have to double check on that, but yeah. So you might as well get in early if you're interested in that. Yeah, that's enough info on that. If people are interested, they can go to the link or email me to find out more. But we are here today to talk to some interesting folks who are having an intersection with piano teaching and also piano playing, and also having a similar thing like we do here, like a podcast or a way to connect with their community on a regular basis. And so our guests today are Yukimi Song and Clara Zhang of the Piano Pod. I know them as connections from New York City. They also know Andrew Inkavet, who I brought in last week, who's another piano teacher, or I brought him in a couple of weeks ago, another piano teacher who's expanded his business in New York City. And let me give an intro to Yukimi, and then I don't have an explicit one for Clara, so we can just let her speak for herself, or Yukimi can for her. But let's introduce Yukimi. Yukimi likes to introduce new values, ideas, or concepts to her audiences, whether they are listeners of her podcast or social media followers, students, or concert goers. By using her creativity in how she presents these ideas, she wants to welcome people into the world they never knew existed before in a fun and engaging way that they feel included and relatable to the topic instead of intimidated by it. At first, folks may not appreciate a new idea. When their mindset shifts to understanding and accepting it, there is nothing quite like that sense of accomplishment and satisfaction. So Yukimi is a creator, executive producer, writer, audio video editor, administrator, and co-host of this podcast I mentioned called The Piano Pod. You can find out more at thepianopod.com. She had felt a sense of urgency to fill the gap between the classical music professionals and the market. And that's since she opened her piano teaching studio in 2007. So this opportunity finally arrived in 2020. She wanted to start this new project with the help of her colleagues to connect classical musicians to audiences through podcasting. And since its launch, she has interviewed guests who have been breaking exciting grounds in the classical piano industry to discuss the traditions of piano and expand the capabilities in this new area. The guest speakers include A-list pianists and composers, performance psychologists, music technologists, educators, entrepreneurs, live streamers, and neurodiverse specialists. So Yukimi, welcome to the Piano Tech Radio Hour. It's good to have you here.
Thank you so much, Ethan. This is such a privilege, and thank you everyone for being here. And I'm very excited to share my experiences with you. And just a few days ago, I've interviewed this amazing pianist, my teacher too, and he's actually the last student of the legend Vladimir Horowitz. And he just shared this bombshell stories, and I'm as I'm editing, I'm like crying at the same time because the story was amazing. But I love what I do, and especially being able to, create this amazing community through, podcast or live stream, or it's just been an amazing journey. And I'm very grateful for Clara Zhang, my friend and my partner in crime. I've been very blessed to be able to do this project for the last 2 years and plus more because of her. So let me introduce my co-host and my partner, Clara Zhang from New York City. And she's my partner, and also she's a classical pianist and piano teacher. Clara, would you like to say more about yourself?
Sure. Thank you. And the feeling is definitely mutual. So hi, everyone. And thank you so much, Ethan, for inviting us back on the show. And so like Yukimi said, I'm also a classical concert pianist. I am currently in my studio on the Upper East Side in New York City. And so this episode we did a couple of days ago was very meaningful because Yukimi's teacher was the last student of Horowitz, and I just all of a sudden remembered the reason I opened my studio on Upper East Side, because when I was a child growing up in China, I had one CD, and in the back it says Horowitz in his studio on the Upper East Side of New York. I was like, that's where I'm gonna go play the piano,
Wow.
And so life is kind of funny like that. And so yeah, the last few years it's been such a blessing, and I've known Yukimi for many years, and she was like a sister to me sometimes, even feels like. And this pandemic actually opened up a lot of doors for us, and we are very fortunate that we are able to maintain our businesses, and our students were able to study remotely online. And I was traveling around the world for quite a bit during that time, and now I think everything is back to normal again. And so yeah, it's definitely a privilege. So nice to meet everybody too. Thank you.
Yeah, and we've had some classical pianists as part. Well, we've had I think you actually told me you had him on your podcast, I believe. Frederick Chu, is that right? Or you're maybe
Yeah.
gonna happen.
That's right.
Mhm.
We did.
Yeah, Frederick is really awesome, and he's also very. He's actually, I don't know if you are aware, he's very interested in piano technology, and he's engaged.
Oh,
very,
definitely. Mhm.
Yeah, very, very heavily, not only the technology of the electronics of it, but also, what we do is as the piano tuners, right? And the people that build pianos. He's very interested in the intricacies of the insides of the piano, how it functions, and engaging with us. So that's been really cool. But, we don't, we're out there tuning pianos, but, we don't always get, it's sometimes hard to relate, right, to a pianist directly, right? Because we know a lot of the technical jargon, right, around a piano. It tends to be hard for us to think about talking about it in a different language, so that other people can understand.
Well, same goes with us. Like when it comes to as pianists, we don't know our instruments. We know basics maybe, but when it comes to a really piano technician would explain to me, with the jargons, and we're like, what? So I think pianists are the only instrumentalists who do not know our own instrument, right?
Yeah,
so yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Right. It's a very kind of awkward relationship, and and there's this sometimes that specialization happens because it's necessary, right? Like we need to specialize. We need to we can't learn everything. But I think it's a delicate balance with piano because it's that moment of communication that really matters, right? Especially when you're about to play a concert. Again, it was really wonderful to hear Frederick talk about how he thinks about a performance, I guess actually a collaboration, with the piano technician, with the piano maker, right? There's all sorts of people involved that sort of make a performance happen.
Right.
So
Especially, yeah, I was going to say, when you listen to our episode on Tuesday, and near the end when I mentioned to our guest, Mr. Harim, I was like, oh, you must know that. So my piano is a 1928 Steinway B. And that was rebuilt for me 10 years ago when I opened a studio by this legendary lady, Tali Mahaner. She chooses pianists, whoever she likes, and she would lend them a piano to, play in Carnegie Hall. And I think in Lincoln Center, she has one piano that she's on loan from her on term. But so when I mentioned to Mr. Harlim, he was like, oh, Tali, did she ask you to rearrange your furniture because of the piano as well? It was just very interesting. 1 second, I'm so sorry.
Nope, no problem. Yeah, actually, maybe Yukimi, you could tell me more about Tali, because it's a name that I'm familiar with, but it's been a while. So
I'm honestly not really sure. I have a upright piano here in Kauai, and I bought it from Beethoven Piano actually in New York City. So, but this legendary figure, I mean, she's still alive, is known for restoring Steinway pianos, and so yes, sounds like it's one of those New York thing.
now I remember. Yeah. There's some side tangents, but I think for the audience, not everybody may know. Tali may have a similar story, and it's probably someone that we should have on the show, actually, now that I'm remembering. But Faust Harrison Pianos, this huge piano dealer in New York City, really just started as a couple, pianists, classical aficionados and players that wanted to try their hand at rebuilding, right? And all of a sudden, they did a great job at it and started building this. And it's a huge business. It's like basically one of the biggest dealers of pianos in the country. And
Faust Harrison, yeah.
Faust Harrison, yeah. So yeah, so we talked a little bit about this before the show. I think one of the primary reasons I think it's going to be cool to talk to you some more is to kind of get that context of like the state of the classical music industry, like or environment, if you want to call it an industry, state of things for classical pianists and educators. And I think it overlaps with us. Of course it does, right? We don't think about it often. Where's the piano industry headed? Like, it's always, how many people are still going to be getting, pianos, who's going to get an upright piano instead of a grand piano? Why do they make that decision, right? How do they make the decision to upgrade? Like, anyways, I've just like threw like a billion questions on the table.
Sure. Yeah.
Just tell me generally, Yukimi, like, number one, what's the state of the piano like players world right now, professionally, classical pianos world, and also like tell us what you're doing to affect it, because I know you're trying to like change things. Yeah.
Well, that is a big question, because honestly, that's a big burden on the shoulder. The only way I can
basically not meant to put a burden, but what I wanted to just want to put the context is, because you're creating the show, right? Like the goals that you have, like what are you adding to the conversation that way? Yeah.
Well, so one thing I wanted to do was the connecting the dots. So before pandemic, or even like when I started teaching young children in New York City, and I was teaching in a very lively neighborhood of Manhattan downtown, like Chelsea, West Village, and fancy neighborhood, and they're very wealthy, but not as conservative as Upper West Side or East Side, or so they're more fun and a lot of But however, as I was teaching, they were clueless, and so I felt like it's not about just teaching young kids, but it's about educating these people. But they are educated people, but I have to bring this classical music somehow in a way that they appreciate it, they understand, and they're not intimidated by it. Because even if I tell the parents, your kids need to practice, like a P is like a big P word. It's like a very bad word that I would say, right? So that started with that sort of question. Like we're both like looking at each other, like, I'm saying the very most common sense about playing the piano, and they're like, what? Is this a child abuse or what? That sort of thing. So I really started to question myself about being a teacher, about teaching these young children. And starting from there. So eventually I wanted to create a show where, all the professionals come in and talk about piano, what it takes to become a pianist, or what it takes to being the concert pianist. It takes a village, the teachers, mentors, technicians, venues, and then those people who work at the venues. And so all these things I wanted to sort of open the box and then display that in front of the audience. And this is what it takes. This is the industry of music. And so I got to interview so many people. And before that, I had one student, and he said one time, Yukimi, you're teaching me all this classical music, and I don't want to do classical music because I want to be in more like in a pop industry. And then I don't know why you're teaching me classical music. And I'm like, well, dude, you're learning how to play the piano, playing the piano. So to me, it was like I had this really authentic classical education. So to me, that was education. But to him, it was like almost like teaching him different language. So that too. And then I was like, how can I really fill this gap. And what he is saying is not wrong, but what I am bringing on the table is not wrong either. So that's, I don't know if I'm answering your question, but that's how I
think those
started. Okay.
Yeah, I would love to jump in there. I mean, I think you are answering my question. I think these are all relevant ideas. I think about it similarly. I wish I had more of a classical training in my background, as someone who plays jazz, and I look up to people. Here's something that I think is valid, and I think this is probably what you're doing, what you're bringing to the table through your podcast and through your outreach. I didn't know that Herbie Hancock, Chick Corea, even some of these rock and roll piano players, Elton John, whatever. I didn't know that they had these classical chops and the classical background, right? There are rumors in my high school among musicians like, oh, we don't play classical, we like rock, we like jazz, that's what we care about, it's better, da da da. It's like stupid things that kids come up with, right? But then the moment that I learned, oh wow, like how does Herbie Hancock come up with these incredible chord changes? Well, he's listening to like Ravel and Debussy and like introducing all of these things into like a different style of music. So you don't learn that until you learn it, right? And I think that's what you're speaking of. Yeah.
Yeah.
So do you have certain methodologies to sort of communicate that kind of thing?
Well, good old fashioned way, let them have them learn the literature. So to me, is to introduce them. So I'm going to start out with the scales and how important it is to learn scales and the chords, basic, major, minor, augmented chords, and starting with that, and then introducing them with the good classical literature. Plus, also I teach them improvisation so that, so there's a compromise. They get to learn pop music, and then they get to, improvise according to the pop tune that they know. And then I teach them harmonization, but also I tell them these harmonies are coming from Chopin, this waltz has the same chord, that sort of thing. So, but then once they learn all these things, the harmonization to even piano literature, Chopin, smaller waltz and things like this, they just be like, wow, this is beautiful. I never knew. And then their interest just, their eyes just gets bigger, and eventually when they become high school students or something, then they start going to the more of a classical concert, and they are very proud of being able to understand the music. But it takes time, so slowly, gradually I introduce them.
That's awesome. I'd like to talk about maybe that some more, but there's another topic I want to talk about. And what's really awesome is you're both sitting in front of your pianos, which I don't even think when we have piano technicians on, we always have them sitting in front of a piano. And so even though your background's blurred out, we can still tell.
Yeah, I know. You can't hide it.
You're also talking about New York City apartment. So
Yeah.
piano basically is my whole entire home,
Exactly,
So
exactly.
it was the UPS guy that actually rang the bell to deliver our Philip Glass music, So this again, New York City, right? Everything is like, I feel like I'm basically on the street, So during the pandemic, because my piano is so big, so people sometimes sit outside with their mask on, drinking coffee, or we'll take it off, and they're like, all the concert menus are closed, so this is the closest you get, So that's why.
Yeah, it's a great point. And I think a lot of, we have folks all over the world, literally. Like I said, we got people in Chile, and, if they can tune in at the right time, South Africa and all this stuff. But we also have people like from different areas of the United States, more rural areas, right? Where the New York City experience doesn't make sense. So I think it's good to have that context for everyone. But yeah, that was sort of like a preface to asking you both the question of, what was the process like of obtaining your current piano? How did you think that through? Was it just something that, a friend had it and it was like, seemed like a good thing to fit? Like, did you spend a year searching and saving? Like, I'd love for each of you just to like talk about what was the process of like getting that particular piano in your space.
Okay.
Maybe.
I can start with this because I think Clara has more interesting story because she has a
Okay.
Steinway B, and it's
The best for last.
we want to hear about Ms. Tully's story. So, but to
Okay.
me, I have a kawaii piano, but this is actually
Just I'll cut in real quick. Excuse me if I'm off camera for a second, but you could keep talking. I'm still listening.
Okay.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Yes. So this is an upright piano, a kawaii. I don't know what model is, but definitely it has a silence feature to it. But it's like really from late 90s or something. So it's an old piano. And I initially rented this piano from Beethoven Piano in New York City. And because at that time, I was still student and I couldn't afford. So I was paying the rental, like monthly rental fee. Then eventually they said after a year of rental, then the rental fee goes toward the purchase. So you have to decide. So I paid them in cash. There we go. This is the rest of the money. I'll take it. So that's how this kawaii piano became my instrument. But I made the piano keys heavier because at one point I had to deal with this very old concert D Steinway somewhere in New Jersey for my solo concert. And then that keys were, because not a lot of people had been playing on that piano for such a long time. So it was like really one of those heavy keys, like, so I decided to just train my fingers in such a way that I could tackle that piano. I have to play like Albanese and very complicated Debussy pieces and things. And so I made the piano heavier. Yeah.
Yeah. Tell us about that process, actually.
To make it heavier.
Yeah, I don't. We've worked with you a little bit. I don't know if that was us because I didn't do it.
Yes, I think so. I think it was you guys. And then one of the technicians was, I think, calling you or calling someone. I don't know, not maybe directly you, but someone from your company. Okay. And then basically, I don't know if this is correct, but I'm sure it is.
Okay. So let me pause you right here, and I'll tell you why I'm asking about this. Okay. Again, we have an audience of piano technicians here, and some folks will do stuff like that, like make piano keys heavier. Some folks won't. Like maybe they don't know how to introduce the idea to the customer, or maybe a customer asked them or whatever. So I think this is it's really interesting to just go through some of the details. If you don't remember the specifics, that's fine. But I think it's useful from a pianist perspective, to hear about the point where you decided to invest in that, right? Because some people are oh, what's it? You can't make keys heavier. What's the point? So just the interactions that you can remember, and how you went about it and how long it took. And I think that stuff's really interesting for our audience. Just to give you the context. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. So, so then I really needed my piano to be heavier because I had to get used to that piano on concert D piano in New Jersey. So I asked the technician from your company probably, and then he said, let me talk to my boss and then figure out. So as he was calling one of you, and then he said, oh, there is one of those clips where you use the stack of paper,
like binder clips.
Binder clips, yes. To use that somewhere in the piano. I don't know exactly where, but he used that clips for every single one of the keys. They clipped it, and then that's how. And then he used 2 of them in each one because I really want the key to be heavy. I tried one, and then I couldn't tell the difference. So let's make it 2. Boy, it was heavy. My piano keys are heavy. Even Clara came to my home several times. He tried my piano.
It's a real workout.
Yeah,
the arm is so stronger.
Yeah. So
yeah. And we had a comment, of course, from our audience because we're all piano technicians. Some that was, let's see here. Actually, this is a long comment. Let's read it. Jim Kelly said, maybe it's from earlier, but let's hear what he said. And then he mentioned what he thinks happened, and I think it's right. But so he said he tuned for a concert, and the drummer was Thelonious Monk's son. That's awesome.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's cool.
He told me growing up there was always music and musicians at the house. He said his dad had a huge collection of classical music in his bedroom that he studied intensely. Interesting. He felt all the secrets were written in the classical composers. Wow. My teacher said, if you can play the classics, you can play anything. It's hard work, and too many people want it to be easy. There is no easy. Yeah, that's fascinating. And Thelonious Monk is that really fascinating character who's, he's got that like music that appears so simplistic on many levels, but is so, it's so inscrutable, right? On other levels, it's like, but how is it so simple but so beautiful, and how is it so unique and nobody else sounds like that? And it's really interesting to hear that about the classical music connection. But the comment that he just made here, which is very brief, but I'm glad I read the last one, was on the hammer shanks. So it's very likely if we went to that piano behind you and we open up the top, you would see on the hammer shanks, which are like sort of the long circular rods that connect to the actual hammers that hit the strings, there's probably binder clips on those. And that's what's causing some more heaviness in your action. And there's also like, you made me think about it. There's also other ways to sort of make your piano feel heavier without actually adding weight. Well, it's sort of adding weight. It has to do with when the keys come into contact with the dampers. So like there's a mechanism that when you press down the key, takes the damper off the strings. And you don't necessarily notice it as a pianist, but when the key comes into contact with that lever that lifts the damper off the strings, it adds a little bit of resistance. I wouldn't necessarily call it weight, but I would call it resistance, because there's like an actual spring mechanism that is attached to that lever. And so another mechanism of adjusting the heaviness and lightness is to adjust how early or late the engagement with the damper lever is. So that's another thing that sometimes technicians do. That's great. So I'm glad you're happy with that. And if it was us, even more glad that it was happy.
Yeah, I'm sure it was your company, so thank you.
Sure. And then, so it sounds to me like the origin of that was with you. So you talked to the technician, you said, hey, is there any way to make my piano feel heavier? And then we came up with a solution to that. Yeah. Okay, cool. It's good. It's good to know that story. Are there any other things that you've done with your piano that originated with a technician or like another musician making a recommendation or something like that?
No, I think that's like the biggest thing that I've done to my current piano. Yeah.
Okay. How about voicing? Like voicing is an interesting topic, which, it's kind of like the afterthought for a lot of pianists, but I think once they get involved with it and start experimenting, it like opens up this whole new world. And I'm running blind on asking you this question. Have you attempted to have any voicing work done with your piano? I'm seeing Clara nod. We'll go to her.
Yeah, I think yes.
Yeah. But Yukimi, have you had any voicing work done?
I think so. I think yes, but I think Clara.
Let's talk to Clara.
Yes.
So Clara, why don't you talk about the voicing thing first, and then we want to hear about your piano purchase story.
Okay, I'm trying to unmute myself. So the reason Tally Mahaner, I wonder if someone in the audience might even know her name. I read about her for like a year and a half, and I was looking for a piano, and I kind of knew she was famous, and then it's like somebody from the books, and you never even imagine you would actually find her. And then the first person, of course, I was introduced was her. So she's famous because of voicing, and she is like almost she's kind of like an artist for, it's like a piano doctor, I guess, so voicing. And I think when she inherited Horowiz's last piano eventually, I almost wonder if that's the piano she's using also as a model, when she, so yeah, every time I have her come in, and I it's my fault. Sometimes I don't have her coming every 6 months, if I'm traveling or something. But she had me have a piano sitter, like a babysitter, and they come in and adjust my temperature, like I keep my AC on the whole entire summer, even if I'm gone for like a month and a half. And so when she comes back, she's like, okay, this time you did a good job. Another time she'd be like, that's not good. This is my baby. What are you doing? And then she would sit here for like 2.5 hours. And it's really not of it's like it's a beautiful piano, but it's always the voicing that she's really working hard on. You can just see that the care she has, and the years she has, it's not something anyone could just do, I guess. I remember when I first had the piano, it was quite loud. It's a big, it's a B, it's a for 6'11", right? And I have a studio apartment. I have very high ceilings, but it's like fourth floor in New York City apartment. So I'm always worried my neighbors are gonna sue me or something, So I asked her if it's okay. So she at first told me to put blankets inside of the piano, and so to stuff the sound. But then, obviously I play a little differently when I'm on stage. So we decided that was not good. And then she was able to tone it down a little. So, but to me, I felt like the voicing part it's still colorful. It's still very beautiful, even though it's not as loud as as if this was in much larger space.
And out of curiosity, you don't have to share, but when it comes down to having voicing done for your piano with technicians, is that something where it's sort of included in the general visit, just a little bit of voicing, or you kind of have a special thing where maybe it costs a little bit extra, we're going to spend some time with voicing? What's been your experience with like the sort of productization of that?
Well, Tally is not cheap. So to begin with, I think it's already included, and over the years. So I believe it's, my best friend's husband is also a very respected piano technician in Boston area. And
what's his name? Do you know?
Michael Blencher, I think he has Irish last name.
Cool.
So I was telling you, Kimi, maybe I should invite him to your show at some point.
Introduce me to both of them. Again, I think I have some connection with Tali very loosely, but introduce me to both of them. Let's have them involved.
Sure, definitely. Yeah. So but anyway, so even he charges, I think, a decent amount, in Boston area, but compared to Tally, he was like, oh wow, that's a different level, so but she's definitely worth it. So and she spends longer time too. It's just I feel very proud. And for longest time, 10 years ago when I first opened the studio, I literally moved in with my piano. I had 2 other apartments. I gave up the apartment, and so I can. And so for a while, I felt like I'm here to protect my piano, and as Sandy, the storm came like a week or two after my piano came in. And I remember, luckily Upper East Side was okay, but I was like, if we're gonna go down, I'm gonna go down with the piano. I have to like drag the leg of the piano. So, but luckily everything was okay. So
So that, again, that's useful. To go back to what you said about like the pricing of it, right? It's kind of a model that we've moved to with Floating Piano Factory. We used to charge separately, for example, for a tuning and a pitch raise. That's a model that a lot of technicians use. So like if your piano hasn't been tuned in a year or two, it can be so far out that it takes extra time. And so you say, oh, this needs a pitch raise, and you charge a little bit extra. And what I moved to, which I kind of like, is just say, okay, listen, if your piano needs a pitch raise, that's included in our base price for what we perform. And then if it doesn't need a pitch raise, we're going to put in some extra time and energy somewhere else, right? Like, and it could be voicing, it could be doing a little bit of repair, it could be optimizing like the touch of the piano or something like that. But yeah, and I think that's, again, I think it's useful for our audience. We have piano technicians all over the world. People just, what we found is piano tuning is not a commodity. And so even though you want to say like, oh, my price should be what that guy's price is, should be this is the price of a piano tuning, right? It's really not like that. It's like, okay, if you want a tuning with Tali, it's a little bit more expensive, but you might get a little bit more with that, right? And that's how she functions. And somebody else might do the tuning and pitch raise separate and all that stuff, right? Lots of different options. So we didn't cover the purchase of your piano.
That's
So
right.
tell us that story. I want to hear about that.
Well, it's like Yukimi said, it's kind of like one of those stories that just I feel like I should make a movie out of it. So
Awesome.
Long story short, so I have this, I don't know if you can, so I have this tiny little keyboard right here. I mean, not that tiny, but it's like a full size. So when I first moved to New York, all I had was that keyboard, it's a full size. And so my keyboard was being sent to different various menus sometimes, aside from me. So like my friend would pick up my piano and send to a menu, and I would take the train. And in the beginning, like I was so cheap, like totally starving artist. I would wear like high heels and carry the piano on my shoulder, take a bus, and then everybody was like, let me give a ride to the piano, but I don't know if I can fit you in. So I had this goal that I was like, I want a Stanley. And growing up, my parents never expected me to be a musician. So when I started on my birthday when I was 3, my grandma gave me like a tiny little keyboard just because I was so energetic, and then she was like a head of a preschool. So she's like, I found a solution for her to sit for 3 minutes was standing up. So that was my first piano. But because my parents never expected me to be a musician, they kept on switching. So I have like 5 pianos in China. It's like the next best thing that they need to get for me to enter the next competition. And they were basically training us like to be DJs or something, and this is something I only just recently realized, as I'm teaching my students. So there was always this goal, like I want a good piano, like I was always.
Wait, I'm gonna unpack some things here too. So okay, you said 5 pianos, right? In China?
3 electronic piano and 2 uprights. Yes.
Okay,
and
that's what I want to know. How many were acoustic? How many were
exactly.
electronic?
Yeah.
And then the other question is, when you said teaching you to be DJs, do you mean be able to play any one of these like classical tunes on demand? What does you mean by teaching you to be a DJ? That sounds interesting.
Yeah, it's again, I'm just realizing now, I remember, so again, that's like between I was 3 to 9, right? And I am the long generation. So most other families, they want the kids, we're only child. And so if you play, you should be, the best. But my mom was like in finance and dad was engineer. So they were like, don't become a professional pianist and then we'll sign you up for classes, right? So, and they took me to these group classes. And so I remember there were John Thompson books as well, and maybe even some Alfred. But what they did, and there was like a Chinese edition of the music, and what they did was the right hand, you're playing all the melody, and on the left hand, because you're playing keyboard at this point, your left hand is just playing chords and then changing the sound. So like there's, I don't know, like one of my keyboard, I think had 200 different instruments sound. So you use the chord and then it could be a drumming, and then right hand is playing whatever, like Turkish march or whatever. And
gotcha.
There's a lot of competitions, and I remember my hair is always like standing up like that, and heavy makeup, like 7, 8 years old, crazy dress, very like colorful, and it stand up together like a bunch of kids. Sometimes we would do a group performance. It was interesting. So I actually never touched an acoustic piano until I was 9, and
again, I gotta unpack this again because this is like different than I am familiar with. So just to repeat, make sure I'm understanding this correctly. You had group piano lessons when you were a kid, and the way that they taught you was to hold down just your left hand, not too complicated left hand. It would play some sort of like background, backup music, and then you would just play the melody in the right hand.
Exactly.
And in addition, they were like having you like, they were teaching you also about the performative, flashy aspect of it and
Oh,
getting
for
you like
sure.
dressed up and wow, see, this
Yeah,
is something
yeah.
that
And a
I'm
lot
not
of
even aware
competitions
of.
too. I've won a lot of
And they
competitions.
and they made a competition out of it too, which is
Yeah.
also interesting. Like I would think, oh, well, they just want the kids to have fun, so they just like make it easy and
It was
and they dress
serious.
up but it was serious. Wow, it's always interesting to hear about different cultures.
Right.
I mean, just even here I am in Peru, and it's just
Mhm.
always always every culture has something different, and it's
Yeah.
fascinating to hear about it. And then you realize how weird your culture is, like
Yeah,
when
yeah.
other
No, my
people.
best friend is actually Peruvian, and her father is I think the head of the second biggest conservatory over there in Peru. So, she and her
Oh,
husband, so now her husband actually tunes a lot of the pianos whenever they're down there for holidays. And it's just, he's
all
American,
right.
so he's like, this is really cool, like I like the
It's another
pianos here.
connection you got to make, Clara. Yeah,
Oh, yeah,
because I'm
yeah, it's the
here.
same.
If
Yeah.
if I
Mhm.
can, we just talked about this last week. What can I do while I'm here in Peru? Because I
Mm.
did a lot of piano, almost like research while I was here, and like
Oh,
what's the piano culture like, and I've talked about that in this show a
I'll be
bit.
happy
So
to connect you.
yeah,
Yeah, of
maybe I can go meet this guy. Maybe he's in Lima or something. All
course.
right. So I cut you off in the middle of the story.
No
Clearly, we're going to
worries.
make a movie about this. So we can get the full story beyond. So
So we'll
you
get
had
to
all these, you get
my
it. Yeah.
piano.
Yeah. Yeah. Move
Exactly.
it forward. Go
So
ahead.
moving forward, and then I eventually came to the US and I came to New York. And then but my first stop was actually Topeka, Kansas. So when I first moved here, I was here on tour, and then I moved to Topeka, Kansas to get my undergraduate. So because there were so little pianists, that they were so kind and generous for us, and they bought like Steinways for us to practice on. So I was so used to that. And then fast forward, after Massachusetts, I come to New York. All I had was this keyboard, and then I just wanted a good piano, and I did all this research. And